Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be doing a webinar on protecting organizations from cyber attacks during the coronavirus pandemic. I want to thank you all for attending here. This recording will also be available at a later date, so you can review the materials that we're going to go over today. Today, we have a chat window or question and answers. You can submit those during the presentation, or we'll have a section at the end of the presentation where you can submit that and we'll answer those. And today's webinar is being recorded, so if you object to that, please disconnect now. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Afi Chesla, who is the founder and CEO of Empow, published author, written numerous articles on the web around the area of cyber attacks, and is very knowledgeable on the subject and is going to be exploring the challenges we have today given the change of working from home and many of these different patterns that we're seeing that may have never been seen before. So with that, Avi, maybe we can go to the next slide and I can review the agenda briefly before we go on. Thanks. Well, the new work from home patterns, WFH, a new acronym that we're all kind of getting familiar with, has introduced a number of vulnerabilities that were previously kind of unforeseen. And this happened so rapidly that many organizations didn't have the chance to really consider some of the impacts of this. The criminals, cyber threats, the attack vectors have really started to increase. They're using this opportunity for us to, for them to really establish new ways of gaining financial gain or attacking or grabbing sensitive data or compromising organizations. So we'll talk a little bit about that and explore some new ways to combat this new reality. What we really want to do at the end of this is to make sure that you have some concrete actions that you can take today to help protect your sensitive data, your critical data, and your organizations. It's an evolving journey, and we'll talk about some of the concepts and techniques that can be applied not only to technology, but really how people need to be involved to this process as well. The technologies can make a difference, but it's also really the coping strategy and the strategy from security is an important piece. And we'll conclude, and as I said, answer any questions and answers we might have. We'll also have a brief demo in the middle. But let's just sort of set the stage here. Where are we? Where have we seen some of these cyber attacks? And as everybody knows, this is now a daily and sometimes hourly issue. COVID-19 has really introduced some of these challenges because of the new working patterns, new geographies, people coming in from VPNs. Many of the SIEM or SIM vendors, we have rules that were written for specific incidents. And this means that these rules sometimes now are not really working in this new reality. So we've seen some of these attacks happen. And I just heard recently that, of course, with the $2 trillion aid package that's been suggested in the United States, where people are getting checks, that there's a new scam going around where criminals are calling up and asking for people's personal information so that they can get this check mailed to them to take advantage of this economic support program. So very fast and agile criminals working around this. And so it pays for us to understand where these are coming from. How do we get ahead of this? So not really just look historically, but look in a predictive manner to get in front of the coronavirus. One of the interesting things also working from home, we'll talk about it in a second, is that in some areas outside the United States, primarily in Japan, even in Italy, where there are homes that are really not meant for the workforce. Your design was to actually have a place to sleep and to eat, and primarily spend your social world outside of your house, and then to have a working environment. That's actually created somewhat of a challenge as well as we go forward with both the working personnel as well as the cyber distancing as well as social distancing. Next slide, Abby. And so as I said, our new reality is that this sometimes is our office. Our office is an ironing board by the bed with Zoom on the monitor to try to connect from a social standpoint and to try to keep our business going as we're going forward. Just that alone provides some challenges physically as well as digitally. And so you have the issues of trying to figure out how you're accessing resources that you traditionally had during your work day. The uncertainty, there's many budgets that have lowered. So not only are we having challenges of accessing resources, but some of these resources may be difficult to even connect to because of lowered staff, because of issues around connectivity, and because, of course, you're trying to juggle your healthcare, or you have an elder, a parent, or sometimes children that are running around behind you. And so therefore, either having access visually to things that may not be appropriate, could be confidential information from client information that's on the screen. So a lot of the sensitivity, a lot of the sensitive data, a lot of the things that are happening in the background have really not been seen before, and they've moved at such a rapid pace that it's a challenge for these security teams to keep up. And one of the things we've also seen is that even the SOC team, of course, can't get into the command center that they typically would use to collaborate and work together. Now they're working remotely, so they're disconnected. They're not communicating as effectively as they were, and so that challenge is also a big problem for folks right now during this time frame. On top of that is the constant barrage of new attacks, documents that need to be ingested and to be reviewed. So the new URLs that are popping up hourly, the stress on trying to figure out what's happening and to try to then work together with your organizations can be a pretty big burden for your security teams. So that's the new reality. Where are we going and what's happening today that we see? And so the converse of that is that since we are kind of in a somewhat of a chaotic environment, that is a perfect opportunity for our attackers. These cyber criminals can say, yep, I can see different patterns. Maybe I can hide myself in these patterns where no one's going to detect my behavior. There's different IP addresses. There's new remote logins. So now that the whole organization is logging in remotely, a hacker's remote login may be invisible to some of the detective controls that are already in place. So this is a challenge. The organizations that have tried to train for security, which is to avoid phishing attempts and all that, which seems to be simple enough in a work environment where you're co-located in a physical office. But now lots of emails are coming into the email box that are emergency emails from COVID. They're COVID health warnings. There are warnings from the organization. And so some of these actually can get through even vigilant employees that make sure that they're not going to click on suspect URLs, may inadvertently click on things that may be exposed because of the unusual nature and the behavioral patterns that have emerged. So what this means is that people typically know that they have environments and they have unknown knowns, meaning that they know what they're looking for, but it's now a new reality, which is I don't know necessarily everything, but I know what I'm looking for. So that's the problem of unknown knowns, but it's expanded to the problem of unknown unknowns, to the point where I don't even know what I don't know. And this is the challenge that the organizations are facing today, which is how do we get ahead of this from a technology standpoint, from a personnel standpoint, and make sure that the information that's coming through the feeds coming into the organizations is reviewed, and to find that needle in a haystack where there's brand new haystacks and brand new needles. We don't know necessarily even what we're looking for in this sea of information. So all this information is coming in. We have the ability to see and hopefully to prevent things that are malicious inactivity. But the question is, how do we get to see them, and how do we understand this new reality and try to reduce this Dolce Vita, or the good life for the attackers, which is that now they're in a chaotic environment with complete possible covering of their tracks and not visible. And it's that visibility and control that is lacking. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Avi and have Avi talk specifically about some of the techniques and some of the other observations that he's had over the past few weeks in this area.
Thank you, David. Hi, everybody. So let's switch to the next slide.
And Avi, you're not on, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No.
I can hear you.
Okay. What I would like to discuss with you, first of all, is maybe a little bit more technical details about the attacks. And obviously, social engineering type of attacks and vectors are very popular for at least more than 10 years, maybe 15 years, but they become much more successful right now. And we will explore why and how we can address that issue. But I'm sure that most of you saw already that phishing and spear phishing attacks are on the rise. Obviously, with weaponized emails within that, the attackers become, as before, more targeted. And in this case, they are targeted at very specific use cases, as you will see in the following slide. Distributed denial of service is another attack that make some disruption, obviously, to service provider, and for service providers in this time can be very critical. Credit theft, remote user credential theft, identity theft in general, of course, can create a lot of impact and havoc to business and organization. And because employees now need to work from home, not all of them are well trained, and the surface of vulnerability become wider. We'll explore that. And of course, brute force attacks become more successful as well. So a little bit of analysis of the trends, and as we saw in the last 4 to 5 weeks, there is significant, actually exponential increase of the registered domain. Obviously, this is some of that is legit, but at least 30 or 40% of these registered domains are not legit. And we see different themes like classroom themes, Zoom themes, and coronavirus themes, and this is really represent targeted phishing attack or spear phishing attack, if we want to be more accurate here. The rise of successful incidents because of phishing and spear phishing and identity theft and account takeover is based on this specific type of domain registration, because as myself and everybody that has a family and kids, everybody's trying to find some lectures and classes, and look everywhere in the internet. So this is one of the attack vectors that the phishing or the attackers are using to trick the users to click on something and then, of course, use the credential or install the malware and so on. Zoom, of course, become very, very popular. So things that are related to Zoom also become more successful in terms of phishing and spear phishing attack. And of course, everything related to Corona. Everything is everybody is in panic. You get some email with a coronavirus theme, and you can click some link which will lead him or trick him into download malware. So we see this trend, and when I'm talking about trends, it's not only about attempts. We see actually successful attempts. On the other end, organization, businesses start to work remotely. So maybe there are some organizations that used to do it and they are in better state, better situation, and they know how to handle that from security perspective. But most of the organizations, they have what we call the access creep. They try just to open everything so their employee can access everything. And that increased dramatically the challenge of monitoring and control of these employees and all the activities that is being done that's related to the organization. So what we see organizations, at least in the first few weeks, that provide more privileges or loosen the privileges of their user just in order to maintain business continuity. And they're doing that by providing full access, open just everything. Of course, as we will see also later in the presentation, in order to share information, they're started to use, it sounds funny, but they're starting to use cloud more. So we know that everybody there is a great transition to the cloud, but this situation right now actually force all the rest of the organization that did not think about it before to move more portion of the data into the cloud and give access to everybody, because it's easier that way to collaborate and continue the business without any disturbance. So privileges are being loosened. Users are now forced from some unusual location, right? Because many of the users don't like to work at home. They don't have any need or desire to work from home. They want to work from the office. And now they're working from some unexpected geographical location. This means not only the location, but also the hours. They are not necessarily, really depends each one with his status and the family that he has, but he's changing his way of working. Sometime maybe we'll start only in the morning, and then during the day we need to spend time with the kids, and then start again in the afternoon or in the evening to work again. And this is not the usual hours you use to access the information. And as you know, a lot of the monitoring and security control are based on these predictable patterns. A lot of the technology like user entity behavior analytics, or the UEBA, what they call, they have some prediction based on consistent patterns of location, access to data, and habits of the user. And now everything's changed. There is a new norm, which means a lot of noise and false positive in all these behavioral analytics systems. So if we had noise before, we just have much more noise right now, and false positive and everything that is associated with that. There is a lot of talking about zero trust in the last few years. It's something that you see a lot, but how can you have zero trust while you are forced to trust more? It's like a conflict. It's going in the opposite direction. And all that is just increase the channels of security, of control and monitoring. And by the way, this is one of the reasons that we see more and more, and I think that it will even go and we'll see a more frequent rate of these incidents of insider threats because of the privilege issue, because it's loosened. So it means that there is opportunity for insider threats to be more successful. So phishing and spear phishing, identity theft and account takeover, insider threat, these are the main serious attack vectors that become more frequent and actually successful. So with that, I would like to talk a little bit here on the technologies, or more, let's say, the requirements from the security technologies or the IT infrastructure to address these challenges of visibility and control. And we're talking, of course, about the visibility and control in this era, the era of the corona, for dispersed employees, distributed, everybody's working from home, and with all the challenges that I mentioned before. I would like to talk about four, I can highlight that as requirements. And the first one is what we call in Avowed the entity risk analysis, or entity focused risk analysis. The fact that we need to focus on employees that now moved from their typical location in the office, which can be more secured, into another location. It means that we need to track this entity and everything that associated with that entity, any activity that we can analyze, and based on the role of this entity or the entity itself, we need to assess the risk. We will explore that in the following slides some more. The second one is the hybrid data digestion. This is also not new, but I think it's now more emphasized because you cannot control the security as you need in this era of the corona without digesting data from any data source that is possible. So if in the past you could digest most of the data to get control based on your on-prem assets, your firewalls, your servers, and your operating system of the employees in the office. Now you need to also make sure that you digest data also from the clouds, because as I said before, more and more organizations, especially in this time, they're using the cloud to access more data there. That's an easier way to continue the business and maintain business continuity. And if you don't have visibility to all the activities that is being done by your users in the cloud, you have a problem of monitoring and control. Behavioral analytics and automation, we'll talk about it as well as the holistic approach of solving this problem in the form of next generation security information event management technology. So let's start with the entity. So entity-focused security technology is, again, in terms of the requirements, it's all about how you can have a solution or the ability to prioritize entities in your organization according to some security measurements. A prioritized entity is a collection of activities, as we call it, with an attack intent structure. And attack intent structure, it's defined as we define it, is an identified sequence of events that includes some security cause and effect relationship, including memory, some historical events. And what does it mean, cause and effect? It means that if we can see events, like you see here in the illustration, let me just highlight that. This is the entity, and we see something that looks like an attempt of a phishing to that entity victim. And following that, we can actually identify the next step or the next typical step, predicted step of the attack, like a drive-by, meaning that probably the phishing was successful. The user was tricked to click some link, and then a drive-by type of behavior were identified, meaning that this user is actually downloading something and probably some malicious code. And not only that, this entity now become a performer of some unusual activity, like unusual access to some data. So the idea of attacker intent structure is to be able to watch an entity, collect all the behavioral activities associated with that entity, and connect the dots based on this cause and effect relationship, structure of an attack, phishing, followed by drive-by, and then unusual access, and then prioritize it. There is a real demand for solution that can actually associate all the events around an entity and know how to follow these type of sequences. Now, another thing that is very important is also the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'm sure you are familiar with it, but this requirement, and we see more and more solutions today that start to support it, is a requirement to say that everything that you discover about an entity should be in a certain language, and a language that security, the SOC, the security community, the expert understand. They don't want to speak multiple languages. MITRE ATT&CK framework represent or define techniques that describe a behavior of attack in a generic way. So maybe a few hundreds of words, definition of techniques, but they're pretty much constant. They're not changing every day. So the requirement from entity-focused security technologies is be able to collect everything, associate it with the entity, and then represent that in one language. In this case, the MITRE ATT&CK techniques, tactics and techniques. Another thing that a requirement for this from this entity-focused security technology is how do you identify or prioritize your entity according to your business needs or conditions. So in order to prioritize an entity, you need the ability to define what are the threat types that you're more concerned about, because you know your employees, you know how disciplined they are or security trained they are, who are more, who are less. And with organizations with a lot of employees, you must prioritize accordingly who you want to focus on. In order to do that, you need to be the ability to filter specific types of entities and focus on them because they are probably more vulnerable than your other employees and entities in the organization. So parameters like the location of the entity, parameters like the identity of the entity and the role of the entity. Who is that? What is its role? And parameters like the sensitivity of this entity. If it's a server, it might include data that you know that is more sensitive. Server is more predictable because it's usually, not always, but it's located in the same place. But if it's a user that has high privileges, and if someone attacks this user and get the credential, it means that it can really create a business impact, serious business impact. So sensitivity around the roles, the privileges of specific entities is something that should be very easy to filter the information according to. Once you have all that, the location, the sensitivity, and all that, you can actually create your dashboard or monitoring console that will be focused only on these groups of entities that are under higher risk right now. And you need this technology that will allow you to do it. The third topic, and I will move very briefly on that because I think it's pretty straightforward, is the ability to digest any kind of data. Obviously, from your diversity of security tools that you have in the organization, if it's on-prem or deployed in the cloud, and of course, be able to cover any kind of activities, not only on-prem, but also cloud activities. And especially now, because in order to maintain this business continuity, as we said before, you need more access to the cloud and more sharing between your employees on a cloud platform, either if it's Google or AWS or Azure, of course. You need to analyze all that. So you need to make sure that you have this centralized data lake or centralized log management or next generation thing that not limit you in any way of aggregating data from all these types of clouds and APIs. And there are some challenges around that, of course. And then I go to the almost the last point, which is the automation. And as I said before, the problem of noise and false positive is just increasing. It's increasing because things are much less predictable. As we said, there is a new norm. You cannot really predict anymore what is an unusual flow. If someone suddenly coming from some country that you thought in before will be very unexpected thing, it's not true anymore. And that creates many logs and events that represent more mistakes and just create a more challenge to the SOC to filter out, the most relevant data and the real attacks. And as David also mentioned in the beginning, the SOC are under a lot of pressure right now because of all this noise, and also now because they are also start to work in a distributed way. They are not sitting near each other as a team in the SOC, in the war room. And that's require some more expertise and orchestration that will allow them to work effectively. And sometimes they're not available because the issues that this era has with the corona. So the need for automation just increasing significantly in this time, and you need this automation in order to address the challenge of so much data and noise that will allow you to investigate automatically all that data and get into the entity that is at real risk or entities that are at real risk. So automation should serve that. There are different types of behavioral analytics and automation techniques that were developed in the last, I think, 5-6 years more than before, in the form of different types of technologies, from security orchestration automation to security analytics platform, next generation SIEM, what everybody call it today. But the thing that I want to highlight here or talk about is one of the technologies. One of the technologies that is very effective in the security analytics world, a branch of artificial intelligence, is called natural language processing. Natural language processing allows to digest a huge amount of logs and data and classify it and classifies it automatically. And what you see here in this illustration, on the left side are the data sources, can be from on-prem, can be coming from the cloud, security tools, operational logs, whatever. They create, as we said, a lot of noise. One of the challenges that the security and the SOC, security analysts have in the SOC is how you classify them. Classify them into this group of potential attack behaviors. And natural language processing, if designed and trained properly, allow to automate a lot of this classification process. And I'm talking about logs that are coming from your network, from your operating system, from the security tools, your email servers, and so on. They all can be automatically classified into groups of potential attack behaviors. And then what this technology can also do, as illustrated here, is to find the connection between them, or this cause and effect relationship that I mentioned in the beginning, in the form of correlation. So we call it adaptive correlation. That allows the SOC to use technology that take all these large diversity of events coming from employees, coming from servers, either if it's the cloud, if they are located in home office, or in the real office, or anywhere else, and correlate them together into one coherent picture of possible attack story. And this technology is also all about looking on huge amount of information back in time to see what actually was the root cause of an incident or possible incident. And also this technology allows to predict what are the possible next steps of the attack. Because if you know part of the story, the system can be trained to predict what are the possible next steps in some probability, and sometimes very good probability. So you can be proactive about these next steps and actually proactively mitigate them. So natural language processing, it's something that you should look at. There are, of course, other techniques as well, but this branch of AI was very successful in the last few years, and for different types of application, and specifically for security, it was optimized pretty well, and can provide you a lot of value in the automation domain. And the last point I wanted to talk about is how you consolidate everything that I said. We talked about be entity focused and do this risk analysis with a focus on an entity. You need an automation technology based on AI or any kind of technology that allow to automate the work of investigation, which means correlation of logs and data, triage, root cause analysis, all these investigation things that need to be done as much as possible. Nothing can be automated 100%, but a lot can be automated. And of course, the data classification itself. A lot of the job or tasks that we have challenges with is how to onboard all that data from the cloud, from on-prem, from different types of tools and IT infrastructure data sources, and classify them and normalize them into a language that everybody can understand on the security world. So data classification automation is very important as well. Now, in the recent years, many have been talking about next generation SIEM, but next generation SIEM, if we need to define it in general, it's a consolidation of technologies or capabilities that were required for many years. And we know SIEM exists more than 15 years now, but the automation and analytics and response were consolidated under the hood of this term, next generation SIEM, because there is a real need for that, especially now. This is just a view of looking on this cyber data pyramid to show the value of integrating all these technologies in order to get into the top of the pyramid, identify the risk, that the entities that are at higher risk. and of course, response as well. Responses, it's also something that were developed in the last few years, and you see different types of SIEM platforms and SOAR platforms and others that create this automation of responses, from network-based responses on the firewall level and switch fabric level, as well as more surgical and per entity response by using identity management types of action, like disable a user or modify the privilege of a user in order to isolate it, and also in the level of the endpoint protection as well, or endpoint firewalls. So this is something that for sure will help significantly to better control the distributed environment of working from home. So just to summarize, and then I will provide a very short demo around it. What we've talked about in terms of what we suggest as the best practices for immediate, that will provide immediate impact, positive impact. So things that I didn't mention, which I think it's pretty much given, you need to secure all the administrative access with risk-aware, multi-factor, and so on. This is something that, although everybody, we talk about this access script, everybody is open everything, so business continuity will remain. You as a CISO or security expert or security analyst in the organization need to make sure now that you're doing some order. This is the time to do it as soon as possible. Obviously, act quickly, identify vulnerabilities and sensitive assets. This is obvious, but as I mentioned before, you need a way to identify, and this is not by technology, by your understanding and knowledge of your employees, who can be more vulnerable, who is less. Someone in the finance department that usually does not work from home or traveling too much is maybe under higher risk than others. So you need to have the ability to group them into different risk levels and then apply the technology that will focus on these groups according to these risk priorities. And centralized discipline security monitoring. This is really the next generation thing. You need a centralized log management and security analytics with behavior analytics as well, and response automation that will allow you to really have control, monitoring and control of this new era. And the last one is the active response. Find and isolate the infected host early and as much as possible. And this is what I mentioned before in my last slide. How do you, when you understand that you have an incident or issue, how do you automate the process of eliminating it remotely and in the most accurate way? And this is these technologies exist today as part of the orchestration and response. So with that, I will move to a short demo. Really something. Let me just move to the. As we log into our system in this case, I would like to show you a very simple demonstration here. Obviously, it's our system, which is called iSIEM, but the reason that I show you that is for illustrating or demonstrating the entity risk analysis and entity-focused security technology. So I will hit this top entities view. And what you see here, let me explain that. This is the list of entities. The representation of the entity here is the host name. You can also have a username or an email. It doesn't matter, of course. But what you see in this dashboard is all the entities of certain organizations, and they are prioritized according to some security score. And not only that, you can also see that the multi-attack framework techniques are classified and associated with each entity. So this is what each line represents. And the reason that I show you that is not only because of this easy prioritization process, but as I mentioned before, you need to assess the risk according to the role, the identity of these entities. And in order to do that, let's just take an example. Let's say that I am a security analyst in the SOC. I know that my finance department is probably more vulnerable today. Why? Because they hold sensitive data. They have privileges that can impact the business if they are compromised. And they're usually working at the office, less disciplined about security, and not working from home. So I would like to focus on all, maybe I have 10,000 entities. I want to focus only on them, or has a dashboard only for them. So I will use this filter, and I will look on, for example, the asset group name here. And I see that, this is things that we collect, of course, from Active Directory, Domain Controller, that I have a group called Finance New York. I will hit that. I also would like, within this group, to identify or focus only on these user or entities that are at least with what we call medium threat sensitivity. Meaning that, in other words, only the ones that have certain privileges that make them more risky if they are actually compromised. And because I know that most of the attack vectors that I suspect that will hit them are part of external action, infiltration, external delivery in the language of my tech attack framework, I create these filters of entities. It's like a projector that look on very specific types of entities according to the roles, their data sensitivities and location. And I will hit the refresh here. And I see that from the entire set of maybe thousands of entities, I have only 2 currently that are associated with logs or evidences of some anomalies. And only one, this Amelia host, is with high security score. And the high security score was identified based on some persistent patterns of steps of techniques that were identified using all the security analytics that I mentioned before. And then you can go here, see who is this Amelia. You see exactly that this is an accountant, part of the finance department. Can call her, see what's going on, or actually can do some fast response if needed as well. Go back to the slide now. So I hope it was clear. I will switch it back to David right now.
Great, thanks, Avi. We've actually been getting a couple of questions in the chat box here, which I'm going to run over in a second. But just to kind of close the loop here, I think everybody, if you don't know Avi, you should know Avi. He's holds a number of patents, and I think the technologies that he's been talking about, while they can be universally applied to many different security products, I know he's incorporated many of this into some of the products that Empower does offer, which is, I think, based on a number of the patents that Avi still holds. So if you are curious, I would encourage you to take a look at the Empower website and maybe take a look at that. But let me just run through some of the questions that I've seen. One of them says, is this a SIM specifically? And the question really is great. This technology can be used as a SIM independently, or if you already have a SIM like Splunk or something else, you can use this to kind of pre-process and do a lot of the analysis to reduce the burden on your security analysts. So the goal here is really to do a lot of the data collection, data enrichment, classification, correlation with a reduced number of people. And that's really also, I think, a benefit of this type of technology. Another question was on the entities. How do you connect the roles or the departments? Is that a manual operation? So I'm going to pass it off to you, Avi. Maybe you can answer that for us.
Yeah, of course. It's important question to answer, of course, because we don't want to do all this job manually. Really depends on the size of the organization. So The thing that at least we do as part of our what we call the ISIM is we automate that process of getting the roles, the group of the employees that exist in the organization, and more information, as I saw before, through integration and APIs to the identity management system of the organization. So it can be the domain controllers, Active Directory, of course, and some other identity management system that the organization have, and include that information. So this is being updated periodically in our system, and according to that, you can all the time filter what groups you want to focus on, according to the real organization structure.
Okay. And another one was on, it looks like compliance, GDPR. It says, can this actually help me with GDPR in any way? GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation, primarily for around European citizens. And yes, the classification piece that allows you to see which elements are coming in. And also, I think the exfiltration. GDPR has a number of characteristics. One of them, the right to be forgotten. You're making sure that the data is not being seen by people, and there's a privacy element. So if you are tracking and making sure that you're not having large volumes of data go to unknown addresses, this can help you. And if you look underneath the covers into the tags and the classification, you can actually see if they would be GDPR compliant data elements. So yes, in some elements of GDPR, as well as other regulations like Sarbanes-Oxley around financial data and PCI around credit card data, could be used with this type of technique. I think especially as Avi was saying with the entities, which is a combination of people, it's emails, it's the host, it's really the context of where this data is going. So it's not a clear picture with just the person, but you need to know the person and the location and the entity itself. So I think it's a great concept there. Let's see, what's it going to do? Groups. There was a question on groups. Is it easy to put these entities in groups, or do you classify these groups, and how do you prioritize these groups? I'll pass it off to you, Avi.
Sorry, I was on mute. Would you say, can you repeat the question? I didn't understand which type of groups you refer to.
It was just the groups, the entity groups, like if finance people and different things of the entities, how do you create these groups, or can you classify these groups?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, you have two ways. You can do it manually by actually associating entities and users into groups and create these logical groups, or you can retrieve all these groups from your Active Directory. If your Active Directory is updated with the roles and the associated groups of the employees, and many organizations maintain that in an organized fashion, we get these groups and we show them. And then based on that, as I showed before, you can select these groups and prioritize everything accordingly. Hope that this answers it.
Great. That's all the questions that I see here. If anybody else has any questions, you can either put them into the chat or into the Q&A box there on the website. I think if you just go to the next two slides, is a thank you slide, and we can wrap up the call here.
Yeah, so I think we...
So I want to thank everybody for your time today. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we can help provide you with some additional details behind this. There's a dark reading article that was just published under Avi's name that came out. I think it goes into a little more detail about some of these concepts. So please feel free to reach out to Dark Reading, which has some great content over and above this subject, but just in general, a lot of great security subjects. And if there's anything we can do to answer any questions for you, just let us know, and we're here to help. So thanks everybody for your time.
Thank you all.